now for one of the most delicious desserts you'll ever taste. This is a dessert that comes from Denmark. My grandmother made it, my great-grandmother made it. My great-grandmother was born in Denmark, and she brought this recipe from Denmark. There are other recipes for apple dumplings, but we think this is the best. Let me talk for a minute about kinds of apples. You want to make sure that you have a tart apple, and there's many varieties. This is a Golden Delicious, and it works really well. In the fall, when it's available, I like to use Jonathan's or Macintosh apples, although Macintosh tend to be a little bit soft and don't hold their shape as well. There's new varieties, and I haven't tried them all. There's Fuji and Gala and Pink Lady, and they all seem to have a good tart flavor, so I think they would work well. The ones that you do not want to use are Red Delicious and Granny Smith. Red Delicious just don't have as good a flavor, and Granny Smith are just a little bit too firm. Although they are tart, they take a long time to cook, so I wouldn't recommend those apples. Golden Delicious seems to be available year-round, and so that's a good apple to use. I know that it's a tried and true apple. Okay, there's 3 steps, but don't be intimidated. They're easy. The first step that you want to do that just you can, so it can be cooling, is in your saucepan you're going to make your syrup. And again, the recipe's in the recipe booklet, but this particular syrup calls for 1.5 quarts of water and then 2 cups of sugar. You may not use all the syrup, and you can discard the rest, but those are the proportions, plus a teaspoon of cinnamon. The next thing that you do is you're going to peel your apples, peel and core. And so I know many of you probably have ways that you peel apples, but I like to take off the top and then take off the bottom, and then I just peel down the sides. And it really doesn't take very long for each apple. One recipe of this calls for 6 to 8 small apples. These apples are actually a little bit larger than I usually use, but that's okay. If your apples are large, you can cut them in half, and you don't have to have your whole apple. Okay, so we've peeled our apple. This is a handy tool. It's an apple corer. What you do is you push that down on the core and then bring it out and shoot the core out, which I'll demonstrate. I think it's an essential tool to make your apple dumplings. They're not very expensive in a kitchen specialty store. Years ago I used to use a knife and have to get in there and just dig around, and it was very inconvenient. So this is a good tool to have. It has a little beveled edge on one end and then just a straight edge on the other. And so you use the beveled edge. And then you're going to go down and you're going to look at your apple and kind of see what the angle of the core is, because sometimes your core is kind of crooked. And so you're going to get it about where you think it's supposed to be. Then you're going to push down really hard. So we've pushed it through, and then we pull it out like that. Then our core is inside here. Then we just push the apple out. Now, as I've looked at my apple, I can see that I didn't quite get it centered on the core. So I'm going to take my apple core again and just make sure that I get that core out, because you don't want to have those little hard bits that remain with the core. Okay, so we've got our apple and it's all ready to go. We've made our syrup and we have our apples ready. You don't need to worry about your apples browning. You're going to work quickly, and so they're going to be okay. Now we're going to make the biscuits. And so in here I have 2 cups of flour. Now, just another word, if you want to use Bisquick, you can use Bisquick. But I always prefer to make my own because I think it tastes better. And it also doesn't have the preservatives in that Bisquick has in it. So in here we have 2 cups of flour. And now we're going to use 2 teaspoons of baking powder, and then a 1/2 teaspoon of salt, And then we've got 2 tablespoons of sugar. So it's a little bit of a sweeter dough than your commercial doughs. Okay, now we're just going to mix that together. Again, we use a pastry blender. If you don't have one, you can use a fork, but a pastry blender makes it easier. Now we're going to add a 1/2 cup of shortening. Now I use butter-flavored Crisco. I think it gives it a good flavor. You could use butter if you want to. You could use shortening if you want to. Those are your options. I like to buy the Crisco in these sticks because it's pre-measured. So this particular stick is a whole cup, and so we're just going to use 1/2 of it and put it in our dough. And then we're just going to, actually an easier way to do it might be to kind of cut this up into little chunks. That'll make it blend a little bit easier. We'll start just blending it with the pastry blender. It really is very easy to do, doesn't take very long. If you want to, you can also do this in your mixer with some wire whips. That makes it go a little bit faster. So we want to get it till it just has a fine texture. It's okay if it has a few chunks in it. That's a good consistency. There may be a few little tiny chunks, but that's just fine. It helps to make your biscuit dough a little bit flakier. Okay, so we have it blended well, and now we're going to add our milk all at once. And then we'll use our fork, and we'll just moisten all the dough. Again, we have a light touch. We're not going to beat this or stir it excessively. We're just going to make sure that all the dry ingredients are moistened. And then we'll turn it out on our bowl, on our board, and we'll knead it very lightly again. Okay, I think we can turn it out on our board now. We'll put a little bit of flour on our board, move it around. Now we're going to just collect our dough out of our bowl. And as we do it, we'll form it into a ball and collect all the flour, the dry ingredients that are left. And it's okay if it's crumbly. And we'll just kind of pat it and form it carefully into a ball. Okay. Now we're going to put it on our board. A little bit more there. And now we're going to knead it very lightly. Again, we have a light touch. With bread, we have a firmer touch. But with our biscuit dough, our sourdough biscuit, our apple dumpling dough, we have a light touch. But we are kneading it. As you can see, we turn it a quarter turn and carefully fold it in so that our dough becomes smooth. Fairly smooth, not completely. But we just want it to be well mixed. So we're just going to knead it a few times here. Okay. Now we'll spread our flour around. Put some little bit of flour on our rolling pin. Now, when we made our sourdough biscuits, our goal was to have our dough thick. But with apple dumplings, we want to roll our dough quite thin because we don't want to have thick dough. If your dough starts to stick underneath, you can move it around a little bit, sprinkle a little bit of dough underneath because you don't want this to stick. And when you roll this out, you're going to actually do it quite firmly because you want it to be thin. Sticking a bit there. And again, I can move it around. You can see that is really very thin. Okay? Now we'll take each of our apples and we'll just set it on there. And then we're going to take a knife and we're just going to cut a circle around that. So we have a circle. Okay, in here we have a cinnamon sugar mixture. It's probably about 3/4 of a cup sugar to 2 teaspoons of cinnamon. But you can make it more or less cinnamony, however you would like to do that. But just have a mixture of cinnamon and sugar. Okay, we're going to take the dough, pick our apple up. Now, as you can see, it's not quite covering the apple. So what you do is you just press it up. And it's certainly okay if the top of your apple shows, but just press it up. So your apple is covered with your dough. Okay, now we're ready to put it into our baking dish. And you need to choose a dish that is high on the sides because you're going to be adding your syrup and you don't want it to boil over. So make sure that it's adequately high on the sides. Okay, so we have one apple. Now we're going to take another. As you can see, we're going to have some uneven shape here, and so we're going to be re-rolling a little bit. But so when you put the apple on there, make sure it has inch and a half on each side, something like that. And again, you're going to cut around your apple. One of our main goals with our apple dumplings is that we don't want our dough to be too thick. So you can see what it looks like there, and we're going to just pull the dough up around the flour, around the apple. This is a dessert that we make every fall because the apples are so plentiful and there's wonderful good apples, and my family loves it. They look forward to apple dumplings every year. I can make them more often, but it seems to be fall is the time we anticipate them. Okay, so I've got 2 apples in there. Now again, as you can see, I'm going to have some, I'm going to have to re-roll a little bit. This recipe calls for 6 to 8 small apples. I have peeled 8, but since these apples are kind of big, I may not get all of them with this. And again, this is actually quite a large portion. You may want to just cut your apples in half and just have a half an apple in your dumpling. Okay, we'll stick that in our pan. And they can be fairly close to each other, perhaps not touching, but close to each other. Okay, so I think we can, now sometimes what I do if I don't have enough, sometimes I actually will patch it a little bit so I can cut around the apple. And that's easy to do, just press firmly and you can just patch your dough because it will all turn out good anyway because it all cooks together. Now this particular apple, see, I don't think I have quite enough dough on that side, so I'm going to take one of my scraps of dough and just set it on there. So as you can see, there's no standard of perfection. You just have fun with it. And also, this is something that your grandkids really love to help you with. They love to cut around them. They love to wrap the apples, and in a minute we'll put cinnamon and sugar in the middle. And so the grandkids love to do that. This is a fun grandma activity. Just don't be afraid of a little mess. You're going to cut around it. Just let them have fun. And again, I think I need a little bit more dough right there on the side, so I'm just going to add a little bit of dough. Okay. Now these are fairly large apples, so usually I can fit more in this pan, but I think we can get one more. So I'm going to go over here. Now it looks like I'm going to be able to get my 8 apples in with this batch. Okay, so wrap it around. Okay, we'll put that right here. So, like that. Now I think what I'll do before I re-roll is I think I'll just do a little bit of patching. So I think we can get another apple in. Now, these 2 remaining apples I'll put in a loaf pan. Okay. Maybe I'll add a little bit of dough there. As you can see, by the time you press the dough up, your patched edges will just blend in with the rest of it. Okay, we'll stick that in there. Now, it looks like we probably should just roll the rest of this out again. Just kind of form it back. See, my dough is quite elastic and it's not sticky. So you're just going to make it into a little ball again, or a flattened ball. Just a little more flour. And then we're just going to roll this one out. Now sometimes I do have leftover dough, and I'll show you what I do with that. Okay, so one more here, and I think I'll just wrap this whole thing around there. If I have extra dough, I just drop it into the syrup, and it just makes a yummy little dumpling kind of thing. Okay, so now we have all of our apples ready. We're going to take our cinnamon sugar, and we're going to put a teaspoon in the center of each of them. Again, I do like these Pampered Chef measuring spoons. They seem to have a good angle on them for me. Okay. So our apples are ready. Now, we're going to take our syrup. Now, another secret for really good apple dumplings is to have a good amount of syrup. So many of the recipes just have not very much syrup, and it's a real thick, gooey syrup. But this is going to be more liquidy. So if you can see how much syrup I have there. It's quite a bit. In fact, I may need to make more syrup to make sure these have enough syrup. It looks like I'm going to need to make a little bit more syrup to go on those, because I like to have this amount of syrup. And then another thing you can do that makes it kind of good is to kind of splash it up a little bit on the dough. Kind of makes it kind of good. Okay. Now I have my oven set at 375, and you're going to have to watch these carefully because different varieties of apples cook at different times. And so if it's a softer apple, your apple will be done quicker. If it's a firmer apple, then it will take longer. And sometimes if it's a firmer apple, the dough, the biscuit may brown and be done before the apple is. In that case, what you need to do is just cover it with some tin foil while your apples continue to cook. Okay? So we'll put them in the oven, and it should probably, I am assuming that this will probably take about 45 minutes with this, and I may have to cover them because I think these apples are a little bit firm. These apples, I did have to cover them with tin foil because they were taking longer to cook than the biscuits. And I ended up cooking these about an hour because the apples were firm. So you just need to watch that. You need to be aware that different apples take a different amount of time. There they are. Here's the second one. There. Voila. Your friends and your family will love it. If you have any problems whatsoever, you can email me. I'll walk you through anything so that you can have a product that you're happy with.